Here, so let's have a prayer and get started. Father, we thank you that you're here with us today. We pray that you'll guide us as we try to understand your Bible better and how we can live to be closer to you. For we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Last week we had started into a time of retreat. Jesus is teaching his disciples now more than he's teaching crowds. He hadn't got the huge crowds. Occasionally they show up, but mainly he's spending time with them, getting them ready for what's about to happen. He's within the last year of his life. And he comes and he's about to give them the final exam and see if they've actually ever heard him. When Jesus arrived in the villages of Ceasarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "What are people saying about who the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some think he is John the Baptizer. Some say Elijah. Some Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." He pressed them, "How about you? What do you say? Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter said, "You're the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus came back, "God bless you, Simon, son of Jonah. You didn't get the answer out of books or from teachers. My Father in heaven, God himself, let you in on the secret of who I really am. And now I'm going to tell you who you really are. You are Peter, a rock. This is the rock of which I will put together my church, a church so expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell will be able to keep it out. And that's not all. You will have complete and free access to God's kingdom, keys to open any and every door, no more barriers between heaven and earth and heaven. And yes, on earth is yes in heaven, and no on earth is no in heaven." He swore the disciples to secrecy. He made them promise they would tell no one that he was the Messiah. They've come to a place called Ceasarea Philippi, or today it's called Bonius. Caesarea Philippi, after Philip, who is the tetrarch of this area, so it's Caesar and Philip put together. It's at the base of Mount Hermon and is the major source of the Jordan River. If you look at this picture up here, right in here, there are four major sources of the Jordan River that come together to form the upper Jordan River. You have the Sea of Galilee here, and then the lower Jordan River. Jews thought it just flowed right through the lake and kept its water. The other major one is Dan, but Caesarea Philippi is the most eastern of the four headwaters. This is where the water flows from, right here, and out as it goes. It used to flow through this cave, but in the 19th century there was an earthquake, and now it literally flows. It's just amazing to me. See this wall here? That's where the water's flowing out of at tens of thousands of gallons a minute. It cracked the rocks, and that's where it starts. I mean, I've always been amazed to look at this. You know, normally you'd have like a big lake, and a river would start there or something, but this just literally starts at this wall right here. You can see the water here is fairly clear. It flows down from that area. You see the river really starts right here, just right on that wall. Fairly clear water that flows out of it, spring water, and by the time it gets not too far away, Jordan means gusher, and it's because it has rapids in the northern part and even waterfalls. This is part of the northern. You don't really see many pictures like this because by the time you see it, it's usually down south of the Sea of Galilee, and it's pretty flat land and flowing along. But here's a picture of that cave from our tour bus, and you can see as we get closer, top part fell in somewhat, but it used to be the water just poured out of this cave. Now, and poured down out of this cave. They had dropped several different weights with ropes on them, and they could never find the bottom of that water, they said.
There is water in the bottom of the lake, at the bottom of the cave.
Not right now, no.
It's dry. It's dry.
Well, it's dry because what happened is the rock right here along here, when it earthquaked, the top fell in and the rock along here just cracked and it started flowing from here. Instead of falling like a waterfall out of here, it's just falling, I mean right there, that wall is where it literally starts. when they would try to find the depth, they couldn't. They became, by Greek times, they thought that this was literally the gates to hell. That what would happen is a spirit, when it died, would flow in here and flow down in that water and go all the way down to hell on it because of it. So this was literally the opening for hell. And they will eventually put a temple in front of this to the god Pan. We get the word pandemonium from Pan. What they thought was by putting that temple there and have pandemonium, if any spirits decided to come back up out of hell, they get all confused and end up turning around and going back. I mean, literally, that's what they thought. So you see, here's the cave. Now there was a lot of ruins there. This was a major metropolis here at the time of Jesus. This might have been a view Jesus would have had. He said he didn't actually come into Caesarea, but in the area around it, standing on a hill here, this is where the cave is, and the water flows out of it and around this way. And all this area out in here was a metropolis at the time. So water flows out of the cave here, and there was a few other little streams that came together and formed that waterfall we're looking at. But all this area out in here, this was a Crusader fort. Remember, that would be in the 1200 AD. But this whole area out here was the city of Caesarea Philippi. And right in here, they've done excavations on a palace that was there. So this gives you an idea of maybe what the city looked like. It had walls. It had a theater up on the hill. It had temples along here. Here's where the cave is right now. But there have been temples here for Pan and various other gods there. And this is looking at the archaeological site again here. Water's flowing out this way and down around. This is part of the Crusader palace that was there. This is Herod Philip's palace, the one that actually built the city. He had part, you can see the part of the ruins here that he would have had. This is part of his palace. He also had a mikveh bath here. You can see the mosaic floor here. We think this was his bathroom too. He had running water because he piped it in. And this is part of the city ruins. Just everywhere you look around here, there are ruins because of cities. But right here, the cave is over to the left here. But this is where some of the temples, this is ruins from some of those temples that were there. It would have probably looked something like this, archaeologists think. Put some names on them. Cave entrances, as you can see, is here. The temple to Augustus, to Caesar, was here. There was a court here to Pan that they had statues in. The temple of Zeus, the chief god, and this upper temple and lower temple, these were where they worshiped Pan. They would have a, remember Pan is what? Half goat, half man. So they actually had sacred goats here that they, whenever they died, they would actually bury them in this upper temple, and embalm them and bury them in the upper temple here. This is where they would do various rituals down here, have plays in the lower temple. And Jesus went all the way here and said, this is, who am I? Now, if you remember, I showed you where the Pan idols were. This is still there today, the little niches. Remember, this is what Pan looked like. Played the flute, half goat, bottom half goat, half man. And these would have statues sitting here at a pagan place. But the water flowing out of the temple itself. This was a very prosperous town. They had a whole lot of wealth there. And Jesus comes to this place and asks the disciples, who do you think I am? People think I am. Well, some said John the Baptist come back from the dead. Others said Elijah. Why Elijah? Anybody have any thoughts?
Because he was taken up.
Only man in the Bible that didn't die. Well, that's another one. What's his name? In the Old Testament, before Methuselah, he said he walked with God and he wasn't. He just Enoch, yeah. And then some said some other one of the prophets. Now those are all high opinions. I mean, you know, that'd be like saying, well, you're Billy Graham, or you know, somebody famous preacher like that.
I still don't see how they could have thought it was John. John hadn't been dead that long.
Well, John, because his ministry started up about the time John was being imprisoned and he disappeared from the scene and all. So, but those are all high opinions. But then he asked, who do you say I am? Now this is the final exam. Do they really understand who he is? And what did Peter say? The Christ, the Son of the living God. Well, he got it right. And Jesus knew that. Then he said, thou art Peter the rock. Now notice this big rock he's looking at here. Thou art Peter the rock. And he says, upon this rock I will build my church. And right up, there's these temples here. And I think that right up on top up here was another temple. So on this rock I'm going to build my church. Now, what was the rock? Catholics will tell you that's Peter. And this means he's got primacy of Peter. Others will say, well, no, the rock is his confession of Jesus. That on this confession that you know who I am. And then he says, and the gates of hell, which he's actually standing there looking at, shall not prevail against you. There's nothing that's going to stop you. And then he says something weird in King James. I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. This is Simon Peter getting his diploma. These are the words that a rabbi would tell his disciples when he thought that they were good enough to go off on their own and be rabbis on their own. He says, I give you whatever you loose and whatever you tie will be tied up in heaven. Whatever you say here on earth, you say, no, that's not true. Remember, rabbis had power to the people, that the people had to do what they said to do. So they would always come, if they weren't really sure they wanted to follow what the rabbi said, they said, well, I have a hypothetical question. My neighbor wants to do this, what do you think he ought to do? And if the rabbi says, well, you shouldn't do it, well, he hadn't really told you not to do it, or etc. So basically what he's telling Peter is that he just graduated. He just got his diploma, and then he starts in on a new thing. Then Jesus made it clear to his disciples that it was now necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, submit to an ordeal of suffering at the hands of the religious leaders, be killed, and then on the third day be raised up alive. Now remember, Peter thinks he's an equal with Jesus now. He's a rabbi. Peter took it in hand, protesting, impossible, master, that can never be. But Jesus didn't swerve. Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God works. He gets mad at him. Peter's trying to say now, look, Superman isn't supposed to be dead. That's like saying Superman got stabbed with a plastic knife and died. Ain't going to happen. He starts to tell them about his crucifixion. He's going to be telling them over and over again. They don't really listen to him very well. As soon as he says, I'm going to go die, they don't ever hear him say, I'm going to rise from the dead. They just shut it off there. Now Peter wants to stop him. And he gets mad at Peter. He says, devil, get out of my way. You see, he's heard this voice before. He heard this voice at his temptation. The three temptations were, do it differently than God's way. You don't have to go down there and get crucified. Do it another way. That was the voice of the temptation in the wilderness. And he's hearing that voice in Peter right now. And he says, Satan, get out of my way. Because he's hearing Satan talking, putting his words. Peter just graduates and Peter makes a blunder. I mean, it doesn't take him long to mess it up. Any thoughts or questions on that? Then Jesus went to work on his disciples. Anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Follow me and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way. My way to finding yourself, your true self. What kind of deal is it to get everything you want but lose yourself? What could you ever trade your soul for? Don't be in such a hurry to go into business for yourself. Before you know it, the Son of Man will arrive with all the splendor of the Father, accompanied by an army of angels. You'll get everything you have coming to you, a personal gift. This isn't pie in the sky by and by. Some of you standing here are going to see it take place. See the Son of Man in kingdom glory. Now, with him saying that, the disciples thought that Jesus was coming back in their lifetime. Read the book of Acts. Read Paul's writings. They thought it was going to happen within their lifetime because he said, you'll see the kingdom of glory. But they did see the kingdom, some of them. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But he says, take up your cross and follow me. This is what taking up your cross means. It means suffering. It means pain. It means hurting. It means mockery and abuse. This is what he's calling us to. And now we move to what we call the Transfiguration. This is where they actually saw him in all of his glory. Some of them standing there. 6 days later, 3 of them saw that glory. Jesus took Peter, the brothers James and John, and led them up on a high mountain. The appearance changed from the inside out, right before their eyes. Sunlight poured from his face. His clothes were filled with light. Then they realized that Moses and Elijah were also there in deep conversation with him. Peter broke in, Master, this is a great moment. What would you think if I built 3 memorials here on the mountain, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah? While he was going on like this, babbling, a light, radiant cloud enveloped them. And sounding from deep in the cloud a voice, this is my son, marked by my love, focus of my delight. Listen to him. When the disciples heard it, they fell flat on their faces, scared to death. But Jesus came over, touched them. Don't be afraid. When he opened their eyes and looked around, all they saw was Jesus, only Jesus. Coming down from the mountain, Jesus swore them to secrecy. Don't breathe a word of what you've seen. After the Son of Man is raised from the dead, you are free to talk. The disciples, meanwhile, were asking questions. Why do the religious scholars say that Elijah has to come first? Jesus answered, Elijah does come and get everything right. I'm telling you, Elijah has already come, but they didn't know him when they saw him. They treated him like dirt, the same way they are about to treat the Son of Man. That's when the disciples realized that all along he'd been talking about John the Baptist. Now, the traditional place for this to happen is Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is located in the Jezreel Valley right here. It is an unusual mountain in that it just sticks up right in the middle of a valley. There's no mountains or hills around it. It's just, these are various pictures of it. You can see it just kind of sticks up out of the valley there. This is where it drops. This is the Jezreel Valley here, the mountain right here, and this is where it drops off into the Jordan Rift Valley, down to the Jordan River. Nazareth would have been right about in here somewhere in Jesus' day, just over that hill. Now, this is the traditional place. There is a church on top, located right here. There's a monastery beside it. There's a Greek Orthodox church here. This is a Catholic church. The only way getting up to it is this winding road. Buses can't take it, so buses never go up there. I have been up there once on a taxi. They let us off the bottom when we took a taxi up it. You know, normally you don't go tour this because it's such a windy road. Buses can't make these curves into it. You go in through the wind gate, and this is Mount Tabor today. You come in here at the wind gate. This fortification here is from Jesus' day. Fortification here is a Crusader castle that was built here. And then there's churches and monuments in the church here today. Looking at it from this way, here's the gate of the wind, and here's the church up here. This is the Basilica of the Transfiguration. It was built, the current building, in 1925. These are some of the pictures of it being built. Today you can go inside, it's beautiful inside. As you can see here, there's a dome right up here with a picture of Jesus' this thing, and the crypt area down here. As you look at this, you see two figures, one on each side. You see Moses and Elijah. Why would there be Moses and Elijah?
Because those were the two that were appeared on the map with Jesus.
But why do you think it was Moses and Elijah?
Because Moses has the law, and then Elijah
Is a
is
prophet.
the prophet.
All the law and the prophet tell of me. That's the entire witness group. Plus also those two people, although Moses died, it says, nobody knows where he died or where he's buried. Elijah's the one who's raised from the, never did die. But they came back and they're talking with him. Now down below that is a crypt area. On Transfiguration Sunday, the light shines through this window and onto the altar in the main church as it rises. It's oriented in such a way. You can see the two peacocks in the window, the stained glass window, but right through here it shines onto the altar. This is the back part. Back here's the crypt. Up here's where that dome is. This is the bell tower for the Greek Orthodox Church, and you can see some of the ruins here. Now there's a big problem with this. At the time of Jesus, there was a Roman city here, a full city. It seems that he's in an isolated place. He's not in a city. Now, he was up at the base of Mount Hermon when he was at Caesarea Philippi. Most people today think this is a traditional place, probably not where he was. Mount Hermon is probably where he was. Mount Tabor is located right there, and Mount Hermon's up here. And remember, Mount Hermon's right here, and he was right here, Caesarea Philippi, the last count we had. And a couple of days later, it would have been most likely he was on Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon's the largest mountain there. It's usually always snow-capped year-round, at least some snow on it. You can see some various pictures here up in that area. They even have a ski resort there. It's not something you think about in Israel, but there is a ski resort on Mount Hermon that they ski. They can ski year-round usually. Sometimes it gets so hot that there's not enough snow on the slopes, but usually that's not the case. He takes 3 people with him, his inner circle. Remember, these are the 3 people that usually go with him when something big's about to happen. Peter, James, and John. Those are the 3 that go with him on a regular basis. They see him transfigured, talking to Moses and to Elijah. What do you think he's talking about?
Probably talking about Peter.
Yeah, maybe so.
How's my father doing?
Yeah. Actually, I think he's talking about going to Jerusalem. He finally said, after this, he sets his face to go to Jerusalem, and he's talking over with them the fact that he's got to die, be crucified, and all that sort of thing. In my opinion, they're helping strengthen him for the journey that he's going to be taking. Well, Peter wakes up, and what does he want to do? Let's build some. Why don't we build some tents up here so y'all can live on up here, and we can just all stay up here on the mountaintop forever. And of course, there's a sermon in that. You can stay up on the mountaintop and celebrate, but you don't get to do the ministry. There's ministries needed. There's people down in the valley that need him, and we have to go to the valley sometimes. Cloud overshadows them, and then they're gone, all gone, and just them and Jesus there. And notice the cloud, what it said, listen to him. They're trying to get them to listen. What about Elijah? Well, that was John the Baptist. At the bottom of the mountain, they were met by a crowd of waiting people. As they approached, a man came out of the crowd and fell on his knees, begging, "Master, have mercy on my son. He goes out of his mind and suffers terribly, falling into seizures. Frequently he pitched into the fire, other times into the river. I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't do nothing for him." Jesus said, "What a generation. No sense of God. No focus on your lives. How many times do I have to go over these things? How much longer do I have to put up with this? Bring the boy here." He ordered the afflicting demon out, and it was out, gone. From that moment on, the boy was well. Then the disciples had Jesus off to himself. They asked, "Why couldn't we throw it out?" Remember, they have been going out and casting out demons and healing people. Because you're not yet taking God seriously, Jesus said. The simple truth is that if you had a mere kernel of faith, a poppy seed, say, you could tell this mountain, move, and it would move. There's nothing you wouldn't be able to tackle. When Jesus comes down, there's the boy. He's really having a bad time. A demon throws him around every which way, and sometimes into fire, sometimes into water. His father needs to have him healed, so Jesus cast out the demon. Then he gets on his disciples about not being able to do it. He actually said this come out by fasting and prayer. It takes them sometimes, and I believe again, there were real demons, just like there's a real devil, and that they inhabited people. Still do. As they were regrouping in Galilee, Jesus told them, "The Son of Man is about to be betrayed to some people who want nothing to do with God. They'll murder him, and 3 days later, he will be raised alive." The disciples felt terrible. I think they quit listening as soon as he says, "I'm going to be killed." And they never really, if they understood he said in 3 days later, "I'll be raised alive," they would have been sitting down there looking at the tomb. They never got it.
They didn't believe it.
Even the women didn't believe it. They showed up because they wanted to embalm a body. They didn't listen. How many times do we read over things in the Bible and don't listen very carefully to what it says? We think we already know what it says. But Jesus kept telling them, "I'm going to rise from the dead." But I think as soon as he said die, they just tuned him out. This is the second time he's announced, not only am I going to die, but I'm going to rise from the dead. When they arrived at Capernaum, the tax man came to Peter and asked, "Does your teacher pay taxes?" Peter said, "Of course." But as soon as they were in the house, Jesus confronted him. "Simon, what do you think? When a king levies taxes, who pays, his children or his subjects?" He answered, "His subjects." Jesus said, "Then the children get off free, right? But so we don't upset them needlessly, go down to the lake, cast a hook, and pull in the first fish that bites. Open the mouth and you'll find a coin. Take it and give it to the tax man. It will be enough for both of us." They've come to Capernaum. They're collecting for the temple tax, most likely, since it's just one coin. So they're collecting that temple tax, and he says, "Who pays? If I'm the Son of God, should I really be paying a temple tax?" But anyway, he sends Peter out fishing. Now Peter cast in a hook and line, just probably like you would if you're a thing, and he catches a fish, and in that fish's mouth is a coin. Now most likely he caught a tilapia, one of these fish. This is one of the fish in the Sea of Galilee. The reason for the tilapia is because they're mouth breeders. They'll lay eggs, and then the male carries the eggs around in his mouth. Once they hatch, the babies will come in and out of his mouth. It looks like he's eating them, but he's really not. And it's for protection, because they carry things around in their mouth all the time. Likely, if they saw a coin, they'd pick it up and carry it around in their mouth. So that's why we think it was tilapia like these that were caught on the Sea of Galilee. At about the same time, the disciples came to Jesus asking, "Who gets the highest rank in God's kingdom?" For an answer, Jesus called over a child whom he stood in the middle of the room and said, "I'm telling you once and for all that unless you return to square one and start over like children, you're not even going to get a look at the kingdom, let alone get in. Whoever becomes simple and elemental again, like this child, will rank high in God's kingdom. What's more, when you receive the childlike on my account, it's the same as receiving me. Who's going to be the greatest? Now, they need to know that. It may sound like a petty thing, but they do need to know. It determines where they're going to sit at the table. Now, they have a triclinium table like this. The place of honor would be where Cindy's sitting. The person on the outside would be the next place of honor, and then it would start on her left side and go all the way around the table down to the table servant down here. And you need to know where you sit at the table. Remember, Jesus said that people would come in and they'd take the high places at the table. But be careful now. It might be that if you sit up on those high places, the guest of honor come in and say, "Oh no, Bonnie, you can't sit there. That's somebody else's table." And you have to go all the way down to the end and be embarrassed. And that's probably what Peter was listening to when he said, when he was decided to sit down there. He came bopping in thinking he was going to be at least the second place, because Johnny helped cook the meal. So baby in second place, and who's sitting there? Judas. So he says, "I'm going to go down here and I'm going to sit over there." Jesus will notice and he's going to bring me up higher. And unfortunately, Jesus didn't know how humble he was being. He just did not notice how humble I'm being. And that's why Jesus washed the feet, and it's the only one that fussed about it was Peter, because it was probably Peter's job to do it. He took a child there. Remember, children were considered property of their fathers. I could kill my child and nobody'd say anything about it. It wouldn't be in a trial, male or female. So they were the lowest of the low. They were even lower than slaves. If you killed a slave, you had to pay. Well, you killed a child, no, because they died so easily. And John answered him, saying, "Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and he followeth not us, and we forbade him, because he followeth not us." But Jesus said, "Forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me, for he is not against us, is on our part." They got jealous. Somebody else is actually ministering and using Jesus' name, and they think they have the exclusive right to that. We have a lot of denominations today that think they have the exclusive right to God. If you're not part of our denomination, you're not going to go to heaven. If you're not a part of our religious group, you're not going to heaven. Well, it must really confuse God, since there's about 20 of them. And it must really confuse him which ones he can let in and not. Because this one said, over here, you can't go to heaven unless you're part of my group, but then over here they're saying the same thing. So, which one's right? On the other hand, if you give one of these simple childlike believers a hard time bullying or taking advantage of their simple trust, you'll soon wish you hadn't. You'd be better off dropped in the middle of the lake with a millstone around your neck. Remember, a millstone is about, yay big around, about yay high off the ground. It's solid rock. It's tied around your neck, and try to swim in the Sea of Galilee, which is 300, 400 feet deep places. If your hand or your foot gets in God's way, chop it off and throw it away. You're better off maimed or lamed and alive than the proud owner of 2 hands and 2 feet, godless in a furnace of eternal fire. And if your eye distracts you from God, pull it out and throw it away. You're better off one-eyed and live and alive than exercising your 20/20 vision from the inside of the fire of hell. Everyone's going through a refining fire sooner or later, but you'll be well preserved, protected from the eternal flame. Be preservative yourself, preserve the peace. Now, we have a problem here. Do you see what the problem might be? Anybody? You know, that middle section, if we take it literally, there's going to be a lot of maimed Christians around. But then if we say it's just figurative speech, then are we not denigrating part of the Bible? You see the problem I've got here? Do we do it or not? Most scholars and commentators say, well, he's just doing that metaphorically to say, do whatever it takes to keep from going to hell, even if you have to lose a body part. But, there's a lot of us, your feet and your hands, they kind of get in trouble sometimes, don't they? So how do you think we...
Mouth gets you.
Mouth? Eyes? A lot of things get us in trouble, so are we to take this literally or not? And how do you decide, if you say this isn't literal, how do you decide what parts we should take literal and what we shouldn't? You see the struggle sometimes here? I don't have a good answer to that. I think it's metaphorical, but then again, how much of the rest of it is metaphorical too?
John Wesley said you use tradition and reason and experience.
To interpret the Bible. But Bible is primary, but then you use reason, what is a reasonable answer, tradition, and let's face it, for 2,000 years Christians have lived this out in their lives. They can't all be idiots. So if the tradition is, this is the way we believe this is the way we've lived this, and then experience, what has been my experience, and how does it work? But it always goes back to the starting point is the Bible. Now see, he did a quadrilateral, and some people think that means they're all of equal value. But that's not true. He was a man of one book. You take that book, and then you interpret it with the three, and by doing that, it helps us understand what that book is saying. Like I say, we don't have to throw out tradition. Some people throw all tradition out, but 2,000 years Christians have lived this out and done a pretty good job of it some places. And we ought to learn from them rather than try and make all the mistakes ourselves.
And then if you meet somebody that literally is taking this figuratively, literally, chopping their hands off or doing something to mutilate themselves, and they're doing it on all honesty and sincerity and faith in God, we look at them like they're crazy.
They get sent to the sideboard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes scriptures are struggle. It sounds simple on the surface. Moreover, if your brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him your fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he is neglected to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man or a publican. Verily I say unto you, whosoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whosoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say unto you, that if 2 of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. For where there are 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. This is one of the more important things we need to listen to. Notice, who do you go to first? You go to the person that sinned against you. You don't go to your neighbors. You don't go to your friends. I've seen marriages fail because a wife or a husband would go spouting off to their parents about what the other one's been doing, and then they forgive their spouse, but the parents never do. And it's caused rifts and strife in their family forever. But if they'd just gone and straightened it out with the spouse first. We go to them first. If you went to anybody else and told them about it before you've told your brother, you've sinned. Then you take a couple of witnesses to tell so they can see what's happening. Then notice what happens if the church gets involved and they neglect to hear the church. You're treating them as a heathen or a publican. Now remember, heathens and publicans are people who are trying to convert back to Christianity. That doesn't mean you have to be mean to them. It means you have to treat them as though they have lost their Christianity, and you have to get them converted again. And so we need to pray for them, and we need to do. And that bind on earth and bind in heaven, bind loose on earth and loose in heaven, gives great power to all of us Christians. And why are we doing that? Because of what it says next. That if two of you shall agree on anything touching on earth, anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them which is in heaven. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst. Why are we doing the first part? So we can be gathered together in His name, in His peace, agreeing with each other. Now the word agreeing is symphonia, which means like a symphonic orchestra. They're all playing different instruments, but they all, if they're doing it right, sound like one group, right? Now it sounds terrible when they're getting their tuning up, but when they're all playing, it makes a beautiful harmony that is greater than the sum of just the single ones. And he says, when you get that harmony going, by bringing peace, which the top part is doing, trying to get rid of any strife and confusion amongst you, then I'm right there in the middle of you. And as we have that harmony with Jesus and we agree on what's going to be done, it'll happen because Jesus is there to make sure it happens. That's why it's so important to be at peace with each other in church, not having strife and confusion. That's why it's so important to make peace with your brother that you think has sinned against you. Now, I know so many people I've seen in church that they hold so big a grudge against somebody or another. Have y'all ever seen that?
Yeah.
That is destroying the church, and that church will be impotent. Why? Because they don't have the symphony, and that's the problem. To have the power of Jesus and His Father in our church means we have to be working together, forgiving each other. The Bible says forgive, or I won't forgive you. And then he tells a story. The unmerciful servant parable. Take this most seriously. A yes on earth is a yes on heaven, and a no on earth is a no on heaven. What do you say to one another is eternal? I mean this. When two of you get together on anything at all on earth and make a prayer of it, my Father in heaven goes into action, and then two or three of you are together because of me, you can be sure that I'll be there. At that point, Peter got up the nerve to ask, Master, how many times do I forgive a brother or sister who hurts me? Jesus replied, 7. He said 7. The reason Peter came up with 7 is because that's what the Pharisees said. You can forgive them 7 times, but on the 8th time you can give them. That's 7 is perfect forgiveness. Jesus replied, 7 hardened. Try 70 times 7. 490 times. The kingdom of God is like, if you think 490 times, if you've kept count 490, then you never forgave them once, probably. Right? So basically he's saying is keep on, just forgive them and forget it. Now, let me ask you also in there, Master, how many times do I forgive a brother or sister who hurts me? Where in there does it say that a brother came to you and asked you for forgiveness? Where does it say in there that the brother came to you and made it right? Anywhere? Do you see that anywhere in there? Is there anything at all about what the other person does to deserve your forgiveness? There's nothing. Nothing at all. We're to forgive. Period. Well, he didn't ask for my forgiveness. Well, so what? Forgive him. Get on with your life. Well, I tried to forgive him, but he wouldn't let me forgive him. Well, that's okay. You forgave him, and that's go on. We need to understand there's nothing in this story or in this Bible that says the other person has to change before you forgive them. Now that's hard, I understand that. but there's nothing in there. We pray every Sunday, forgive me my trespasses as I forgive others. Remember that as can mean two things. In the same manner as, or at the same time as. You get forgiven because you forgive others, God forgives you at that time. When you forgive, He's going to forgive you just like you forgive others. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who decided to square accounts with his servants. As he got underway, one servant was brought before him who had run up a debt of $100,000. He couldn't pay up, so the king ordered the men along with his wife, children, and goods to be auctioned off at the slave market. That was a common way of dealing with debt. Oops. The poor wretch threw himself at the king's feet and begged, give me a chance and I'll pay it back. All back. Touched by his plea, the king let him off, erasing the debt. He couldn't have paid it back. The servant was no longer out of the room when he came upon one of his fellow servants who owed him $10. He seized him by the throat and demanded, pay up or not. The poor wretch threw himself down and begged, give me a chance and I'll pay it all back. He could have paid $10. But he wouldn't do it. He had him arrested and put in jail until the debt was paid. When the other servants saw what was going on, they were outraged and brought the detailed report to the king. The king summoned the man and said, you evil servant, I forgave you an entire debt when you begged me for mercy. Shouldn't you be compelled to be merciful to your fellow servant who asked for mercy? The king was furious and put the screws to the man until he paid back his entire debt. And that's exactly what your Father in heaven is going to do to each one of us who don't forgive unconditionally anyone who asks for mercy. If he had been required to pay that $100,000 back, I could see him forcing this man to pay $10. He just been forgiven all of that. $10 was nothing. We have been forgiven so much by Jesus and God. Our debt has been wiped clean by Jesus. Can't we forgive others when they sin against us? That's the whole point of the story. And we need to do that. Forgive unconditionally one who asks mercy. Any thoughts, questions, statements, opinions? The key's settling debts. The man says, and it's the identical words both times. Wait, and I will pay you back in full. King says, okay. You just cancel your debt. But he won't let his servant, the other servant, and he throws him in jail. So any thoughts or questions on that before we move on? Well, am I banging on too many people today? I'm just telling you what the Bible says. Now he's headed to his last trip to Jerusalem. He's pretty well abandoning Galilee, leaving Galilee and heading towards Jerusalem now. He won't be back in Galilee. Later, Jesus was going about his business in Galilee. He didn't want to travel to Judea because the Jews were there looking for a chance to kill him. He was near the time of the tabernacles. That would be in the fall. A feast observed annually by the Jews. His brother says, why don't you leave here and go up to the feast so your disciples can get a good look at the works you do? No one who intends to be publicly known does everything behind the scenes. If you're serious about what you're doing, come out in the open and show the world. His brothers were pushing him like this because they didn't believe in him either. Jesus came back on them. Don't crowd me. This isn't my time. It's your time. It's always your time. You have nothing to lose. The world has nothing against you, but it's up in arms against me. It's against me because I expose the evil behind its pretensions. You go ahead, go up to the feast. Don't wait for me. I'm not ready. It's not the right time for me. He said this and stayed in Galilee, but later, after his family had gone up to the feast, he also went. But he kept out of the way, careful not to draw attention to himself. The Jews were already out looking for him, asking around, where is that man? There was a lot of contentious talk about him circulating through the crowd. Some people were saying, he's a good man. But others said, not so. He's selling snake oil. The kind of talk went on in guarded whispers because of intimidating Jewish leaders. With the feast already half over, Jesus showed up at the temple teaching. The Jews were impressed but puzzled. How does he know so much about being schooled, without being schooled? Jesus said, I didn't make this up, but I teach comes from the one who sent me. Anyone who wants to do his will can test this teaching and know whether it's from God or whether I'm making it up. A person making things up tries to make himself look good, but everyone trying to honor the one who sent him sticks to the facts and doesn't tamper with reality. It was Moses, wasn't it, who gave you God's law, but none of you are living it. So why are you trying to kill me? The crowd said, you're crazy. Who's trying to kill you? You're demon possessed. Jesus said, I did one miraculous thing a few months ago, and you're still standing around getting all upset, wondering what I'm up to. Moses prescribed circumcision. Originally it came not from Moses, but from his ancestors. And so circumcise a man dealing with one part of his body, even if it's the Sabbath. You do this in order to preserve one item in the law of Moses. So why are you upset with me because I made a man's whole body well on the Sabbath? Don't be nitpickers. Use your head and heart to discern what is right and test what is authentically right. Remember, he healed the man that was crippled down by a pool of Bethesda when it was on the Sabbath, and he was carrying his cart around, and they were upset. That's when some of the people in Jerusalem said, isn't this the one they were out to kill? And here he is out in the open saying whatever he pleases, and no one is stopping him. Could it be that the rulers know that he is in fact the Messiah? And yet we know where this man came from. The Messiah is going to come out of nowhere. Nobody is going to know where he comes from. That provoked Jesus, who was teaching in the temple, and cried out, yes, you think you know me and where I'm from, but that's not where I'm from. I didn't set myself up in business. My true origin is the one who sent me, and you don't know him at all. I come from him. That's how I know him. He sent me here. They're looking for a way to arrest him, but not a hand was laid on him because it wasn't yet God's time. Many from the crowd committed themselves to faith in Jesus, saying, will the Messiah, when he comes, provide better or more convincing evidence of this? The Pharisees, alarmed at this seditious undertow going through the crowd, teamed up with the priest and sent the police to arrest him. Jesus rebuffed them. I am with you only a short time. Then I go on to the one who sent me. You will look for me, but you won't find me. Where I am, you can't come. The Jews put their heads together. Where do you think he's going? That we won't be able to find him. Do you think he's about to travel to the Greek world to teach the Jews? What is he talking about anyway? You will look for me, but you won't find me. And where I am, you can't go. What do y'all think he meant?
He's going back to heaven.
Yeah, you're going back to heaven, you can't go there. Now, I'm going to stop here. We're going to get into the festival he's at. Festival of Booths it's called, Festival of Tabernacles, Feast of Ingatherings, Festival of Shelters, Sukkot, or Festival of Dedications. It all has these names, but he's about to do some things at this festival that unless you understand the traditions of what was happening at the festival, it won't make much sense to you. So we're going to go on and stop here. Anybody have any questions, comments, statements, or opinions? You can turn that off if you want to, Deborah. The projector. Anybody have any comments, questions, statements, or opinions? Ideas? Wow. Either y'all didn't listen to me today or I've bulldozed you too much.
The scripture's pretty plain.
Sometimes they are pretty plain, and sometimes we don't listen to them very well. You can go on and unplug it.
I'd like to share something. There's a distant young man, relative in Pennsylvania, a cousin's child or something down the line. 2 or 3 years ago, this fellow was working in a